I have picked a topic of resilience and an area where I still am, in a sense, working through the topic. And the purpose of making this presentation is to involve you in this dialogue of individual resilience and institutional resilience. When we talk about resilience, it is never specified whether it is of an individual or an institution. And there are many discussions and webinars which are going on that do not quite make this distinction. So I thought that this morning, for those of you west of Hong Kong and afternoon for those of you east of Hong Kong, I thought that I might explore some of these areas and aspects with you rather than actually uh, give a lecture or a presentation. So um, let's begin from here. As you know, COVID-19 has stressed a great deal of the higher education system. It has stressed people, it has stressed health systems, education systems, governments, and institutions to close to their limit. I mean, governments are now or have been paying salaries of everybody. They have been providing rental rebates, property tax rebates, just to keep their various economies afloat. People have lost their jobs, businesses have closed, travel has stopped mainly, and students are just beginning to go back to school. And on top of that, of course, we all know about 1.5 million people have died due to COVID alone, and many more due to the lack of health care and due to other morbidities. So we have a generational crisis at hand, a generational crisis for youth where their education and their career pathways have been disrupted. So it's almost like a whole year of disruption and learning deficit, all the way from preschool, from play school to kindergarten to primary and secondary schools to higher education. And this has downstream effects as well. Careers, for example, marriage, for example, family formation. So this has huge social implications, this 1 year off from school and learning. So while governments and institutions are trying to address this ongoing crisis, it will be useful to look at what are some of the lessons that we can learn while we are doing so. So let me start with a quick poll, and it will be timely to get your views on this. Are we going to see more disruptions, do you think, to our daily life? Or maybe not? Are we going to see more disruptions in daily life in future? So give us your opinion. Very good. 70% of you are voting now. Okay, I think we can stop the poll now. Can you share the results? So you can see that 82% of you think that there will be more disruptions in future. And these disruptions will come from various events, not just health-related events. They could be, for example, just today, there's a massive cyclone heading towards South India. And then you also have flooding, you'll have fires, you'll have many natural disasters happening due to climate change. You might have strikes, you might have political conflicts. There are quite a number of things which will affect our daily life and, of course, schooling and education. So the pandemic is not going to be an isolated instance. We are going to need to prepare ourselves for resilience. What is actually meant by resilience? What do we mean by resilience? It is actually a word that has migrated from engineering to social systems. And this is why I'm quite interested in this, because I'm also trained as an engineer. It is a term that's used in the design of buildings, roads, bridges, canals, dams, ships, aircraft, power systems, etc. So because in engineering, we require a factor of safety to be built in so that these physical systems can withstand extreme loads or extreme events that may occasionally happen, but not everyday happenings, such as freak floods, freak winds, lightning strikes, overloads, and so on. And therefore, in engineering, this determines the choice of materials that we use, the amount of redundancy that we build into the design, safety features, and so on. And all of this is to keep users safe. So while we do not design for bridges to fall down, occasionally they do for whatever reason. For example, in Japan, resilience is built into buildings to withstand the movements of the earth because of the frequency of earthquakes. So they have some flex, some spring built in between the foundations and the superstructure. So even with the earth shakes, the building is able to flex a little bit to the left and right and still be safe. Now at the opposite end are houses which are made to fall easily without harm and without injuring anyone. So they break up easily and they can be put back quite easily. That's also another form of resilience. Similarly, in the world of ICT, we now have networks and software and hardware, websites, and therefore these have to be designed to withstand very unusual heavy loading and demand. For example, during peak periods such as sales, and the whole system has to be resilient to attacks, to hacking, to bugs, to viruses, enemy action, and so on. And it includes now financial institutions because they're all going digital now. Banks, insurance companies, payment gateways, e-commerce sites, and especially data centers. Now, data centers are the places that hold our so-called cloud data. I mean, the data is not in the cloud, but they're actually located somewhere in real life, in a physical space, in data centers. And there are data centers in many parts of the world. And finally, governments and bureaucracies have to learn to cope with social media, fake news, anti-science movements, and conspiracy theories. So everybody needs somehow to build their systemic resilience as we continue into the future. So the more interconnected we are, obviously, the higher the risk and the greater the impact of failure. For example, even if there is a small cable failure in one part of the network, it actually affects other parts of the network, and you might find perhaps half of a city in a blackout situation. Or if there is a bug in a Google or Gmail program, millions and millions of people are affected by a short or long breakdown in our email services. And if email services go down or internet services go down, that's a huge cost to business and industry. So if we compare the engineering system with the university system, you can find that they're actually quite similar. They are complex and interconnected. They're expensive to build and to operate. They both deal with flows. In the engineering analogy, they deal with traffic. utilities, data, power. In the case of universities, we deal with the flow of knowledge, the flow of students, the flow of funds. Both have a rather inflexible cost structure. Safety, of course, is paramount on both sides. And whenever we design something, there's always a risk versus economics balance. It's not something that is totally risk-free or totally 100% resilient. And both the engineering system and the university system are part of a larger system, a larger physical system or a larger social system. So in that case, the question is, are they exactly the same? What's the difference between an engineering system and a university system? And the answer, of course, is quite obvious. The difference is the human element. A higher education infrastructure is not inanimate, but human. It has humans and is run by humans who are knowing and feeling and who have souls in them. They have ethics and they have values and they have truth. Leadership of the university, including some of you, the deans of schools and faculties and colleges, student leaders, faculty, staff, and students, you are the gears and the levers of the university system. You as individuals and collectively run the university system. So therefore, you are not an inanimate system. You are actually a feeling, living, humanized, organic university system. And so how you, the leaders of the university, respond to black swan events to protect the university and the university community will be decisive in the future of the university. So can university leaders prepare themselves for such black swan events, and how do they do that? So this is called resilience. And is there a connection between individual resilience and institutional resilience? This is how I came upon this question in the first place. Recently, I have been giving some webinars of schooling in the new normal. And this is to both private school leaders as well as public school leaders. And during these conversations which I've been having with school principals and superintendents, they are always bemoaning that the Ministry of Education or the government is not helping them to cope as schools reopen, that they are not providing them with more resources, with better connectivity, the teachers are not being paid, fees are being fixed, parents might not be sending their children to school, etc. So keep in mind that public school principals are principally bureaucratic in nature. They are bureaucrats. They have been trained and they have been promoted and rewarded by following rules and regulations. So it's not surprising to me that very few took the view that they could help themselves instead of waiting around for assistance. So all their whining about, I didn't get this, I didn't get that, struck me as situation of low personal resilience. So they did not realize that they had, in fact, their own sphere of influence. They could engage the community to support the school. They could engage business and religious and community leaders. And they could use, for example, negotiate to use community spaces so that they can support split schools, schools that are running half in capacity and the other half perhaps in another community location. They could negotiate with phone companies to get cheap rates for students. They could negotiate with businesses to give them discounts in these hard times. For example, they could ask for old phones or tablets or computers to be donated to the school. So quite a number of things that school leaders could take it upon themselves to do if they had the initiative and the resilience. So is there a connection? This spurred my thinking about the linkage between individual resilience and collective resilience and institutional resilience. Is there really a connection? So that's why it's a hypothesis that I'm having. So let me start by asking you this question. Is there a causal link between individual resilience and institutional resilience? People are still polling. I'll just wait for a few seconds. Can we stop the polling? Well, it shows that 93% of you think that probably there's some kind of link, a causal link. Only 3% think no, and 4% will say maybe there is, maybe there isn't. So let's see, and I'm having the same hypothesis as well. Probably there is. Let's find out. So what is individual resilience? If you look at literature, it is the ability to pick oneself up after a loss. And among 21st century competencies, resilience is given as one of the qualities that we want to train students in. The ability to pick oneself up after a loss. And this is also called positive education, or posit. It is the ability to learn from past mistakes, to have a very positive mindset, not to be very optimistic instead of pessimistic, and not to be faced by failure, but to learn from the failure. This requires us to have high endurance and stamina, not ready to give up, and able to re-strategize and reorganize when things don't go according to plan. It's also called the adversity quotient. 1997, published by Paul Stoltz, AQ, is given as grit, backbone, fortitude, tenacity, persistence, and self-sufficiency. A very high level of self-awareness is needed to have this adversity quotient. It's associated with stability, with strength and power. And it's about believing that the job can be done regardless of what kind of difficulties that you may be facing, that with effort and power, you can get the job done. So think, for example, of sportsmen, of entrepreneurs, of inventors, of social workers, NGOs, the poor, who work with very limited resources, and yet they have to survive. Now, not all NGOs are well endowed. Many NGOs, for example, are operating from hand to foot, but nevertheless, they believe with a great passion in the cause that they are in, and therefore they continue to be resilient and pick themselves up and move on to the next and the next and the next. Entrepreneurs are a very good example. I mean, if you look at sports persons, if you have, for example, a tennis match between Rafael Nadal and Djokovic, and if they are tied 5-all, they're tied 5-all in the fifth set, it's the person with the greater resilience is the one who's going to find that inner strength to get to the next ball and the next ball and win the next point. And this is shown in any sport, in swimming and so on and so forth. But this is individual resilience. We haven't come to institutional resilience yet. So being resilient means it's the ability to withstand adversity and to bounce back from difficult life events. But I want to make a proviso here that being resilient does not mean that people don't experience stress or emotional upheaval or trauma or suffering. They do, they do. Uh, so it's not just enough to equate that with mental toughness, because demonstrating individual resilience means working through your own emotional pain and suffering and showing empathy to others who are also suffering, to become a human. And you need to be a human in order to be strong. It's not as if that these are the Rambos of the world. Um, you don't need to look upon someone who's physically strong with stamina and endurance for resilience. Even someone who might not look to you as a very strong person could be mentally strong, could be mentally tough, and they would have strong emotional strength as well. So they might go through a lot of suffering, but they also have the mental positivity and optimism that they can get through their difficulties. And that's what it means to be individually resilient. Here's a question. A young scientist receives an important award, a research grant early in his career. But another scientist on a peer level does not receive. Who do you think becomes more successful in the long run? Very interesting result here. Keep voting. Okay, I think we can stop the voting now and show the results. Well, many of you are obviously onto this adversity thing, that those who have been through more difficulties are more likely to succeed in the long run. Now, someone has raised a hand. Should I take a question now, or leave it till later?
I would suggest we leave it later, Dr.
Okay,
Prasad.
thank you, Viveka. There was a research done on this particular item here, the question that I have asked. They studied the grants given to young researchers of the National Institute of Health in the US. And you know, in the US, they have a very early grant system for very young researchers who are just out of university, just in the postdoc area. And this is quite an important grant for them. So large numbers of people are applying for this grant. And because there's a limited amount of money, you can actually draw the line between those who got the grant and those who didn't get the grant. And the research studied those people who just managed to get the grant and those people who just managed to miss the grant. And they tracked their careers for many years afterwards. And as you have all guessed, the young scientists who just missed the grant had far more publications and far more research success later in life than the one who got an early start. So that shows you a very small example of how adversity and resilience plays out in the long run. So we have this thing called adversity quotient. While adversity quotient plays a major role in predicting success and staying power in organizations, this is not enough. It's not enough to have your AQ. You also need to have, and good leaders also tend to have good EQ and good IQ, emotional quotient and intelligence. A good IQ allows a person to learn the facts and processes quickly, while a good EQ allows a person to stay level-headed and calm in tense or high-stress situations. So a good EQ and a good IQ enables you to remain calm, process the evidence, process the data quickly so that you can make decisions. But how you react in the first place to adversity is your AQ. So AQ will demonstrate its usefulness when the organizations are greatly challenged. And the higher a leader's AQ is, the better the chances, and this is a hypothesis obviously, the better are the chances of his or her success in a tough situation. Now, leaders who get back quickly after facing defeat or failure are some of the organization's most valuable assets. So there are 7 integral and interrelated components that make up individual resilience. They are competence and confidence. So first of all, you have the ability to cope, you have the competence, you have the right skills, but then you also have a high confidence. You have to cultivate a belief in your own ability. There are a lot of people who may have the right skills, the right knowledge, but who may not have sufficient self-belief. Their self-belief is only working when things are going right. But when things start to go wrong, the belief in their own ability and their confidence goes down. And someone else has to start stepping in and taking decisions. Secondly, connection. You have to stay connected with your sources of support. That could be your peer group, your management team, your family, and so on. So you have to stay connected and derive support from them and give them support as well. And therefore, you also need to be open and frank and transparent about what you're feeling, what you're going through, and talk about what you're going through. Number 4, be helpful to others, contribute, be empathetic. So show that you're human, show that you're also stressed out, but show that you're also tough, show that we can do this together, show that we can turn this around. Activate a positive emotion in others and create an attitude of survivorship, cope and control. And finally, seek meaning in what's happening around you. Seek meaning in the relationships that you have. Seek meaning in the position that you have. Seek a purpose, because this position and this purpose has been given to you. And at the time that this adversity, this pandemic has happened, it is upon you now. You have been entrusted with this purpose. And therefore, you have to seek meaning in why you have been given this purpose to take your institution out of this pandemic, out of this crisis, into the next level. So therefore, it's up to you to lead your organization out. Let's look at the higher education institutions. As I said earlier, university is highly complex, interconnected, multifaceted organization. It's got students, professors, faculty, and higher education institutions were hit by COVID when there were numbers of students on campus and halls. It was in the middle of the academic semester in the US, start of the academic year in Australia, New Zealand is the middle of recruitment. And you were hit by the closure of campuses, emergency shift to remote learning modes, postponement of student assessments, examinations, a huge financial impact of international students not returning, and a perceived drop in value, because as you go into online remote learning, people will say, look, why am I paying so much money for this? And in the US, it is estimated that close to 1/3 of US educational institutions are at financial risk. And a survey has shown that 90% of parents are thinking about not sending their children if online learning were to continue. For example, there's this article in CNN where students are calling for colleges to cut tuition costs as school year begins online. There has been a study by Scott Galloway, and you can Google this. It's quite a viral blog that has been going around, where he has studied the two axes of value on one hand and vulnerability on the other. Value being the value that you add to the student in terms of credentials of your institution, the admit rate, your ranking, Google's hit rate, the experience of students, the life rating, the experience rating of students, and finally, the value of the education in terms of net present value of graduate earnings, the ratio of the faculty wages versus the tuition that is being charged, vulnerability in terms of your endowment per student. If your endowment per student is very, very low, you're highly vulnerable, and the percentage of international students. If the international student percentage is very high, you're highly vulnerable. So Scott Galloway came up with this quadrant where those who are less vulnerable and of high value will thrive. Those who are more vulnerable and high value might survive. Those who are of low value but less vulnerable will struggle. And those who are low value and more vulnerable will be challenged and might not survive. But this is just one presentation by one professor. But you need to go through his blog to look at his research. So Galloway's conclusions are highly well-endowed US colleges with low admit rate and high fees can maintain face-to-face teaching because they have the capacity to go into low intensities. But the majority of colleges, the mid-tier colleges, can move to online learning, and therefore they can also lower fees while expanding the enrollment. Now, if they expand the enrollment, of course, they are taking it from the high fee colleges, which will be then of low value, high risk colleges, which will be then at the risk of closing down. So this is just one study that I thought I would share with you. So this is the hypothesis. Leaders who have built in strong resilience characteristics should be better able to transfer these attitudes to their team and institution. And I think that if they have good IQ and EQ and communication skills, that would be true. They would be able to generate optimism, confidence, initiative, strength of purpose, meaning, and the narrative of pulling through. Not a narrative of suffering, not a narrative of struggling, but a positive narrative of let's pull through this together. They are able to involve all the stakeholders in responding together. Stakeholders meaning the board, regulators, parents, financiers, investors, together to respond together. They know what it takes to recover quickly and also be able to sympathize and empathize with their students and faculty and parents and support those in need and be able to see beyond the crisis and to see the opportunities. Such leaders would have better foresight and would have done scenario planning in their own minds because they're thinking this through all the time, either by prevention, by design and redundancy, and doing buffer inventory, preparedness through their past experience and regular drills. For example, those countries in East Asia who have been through SARS were much better able to plan and respond to the COVID crisis than those which did not go through the SARS crisis. I remember that when I was deputy president of NUS, I was given the responsibility of being the SARS czar, and we had to divide the whole campus into zones and not prevent students and staff move across zones. And that's exactly what they did in 2020 and very quickly. So leaders will also be very quick in response and recovery, in emotional recovery, mental recovery and physical recovery, because they have calmness under pressure. They're gathering data all the time. They're gathering evidence. They have the confidence and speed of decision making, and they're transparent and giving regular information, regular communication. And they operate at the new normal much more quickly. And then having got back to normal, the whole cycle starts again. And these resilient leaders help to build resilience organizations. What are some of the online learning opportunities? Here I want to throw some ideas I have for your consideration, and we can discuss this later. Currently, higher education works on a 4+2 system. That means 4 years undergraduate plus 2 years research masters. But you could reimagine this as 2+2+2 instead of the current 4+2, where you might have a 2-year associate degree or with a greater emphasis on career-based degrees rather than academic degrees. With online learning now, we could decentralize our campuses. Today, our universities are built in such a way that they are large campuses. Some may have branch campuses, but they are really smaller branch campuses. But there's no reason now with remote learning to decentralize our campuses across territories, to build resilience so that even if one campus was affected, the other campuses might not be affected. So across territories and geographies. Thirdly, and here's an idea that you might want to think of, is broadcast the best of your lecturers, your best of your topic lecturers or course lecturers. And use the face-to-face seminars and tutorials and lab work to contextualize the learning delivered by the best professors. Of course, today, you can already get lectures from the very best in economics, in social science, in engineering, in history, geography. They're all already available through various technology platforms. So why not make use of them? So there's no necessity to hire so many different lecturers and professors to teach the same subject. If you look at the curriculum across many universities, the year 1 curriculum, the year 2, year 3, and the final year curriculum, they are approximately the same. However, the difference between one university and the other is the ability to contextualize it to the local situation, to the country and to the region and to the city and to the village. So therefore, what I'm saying is we might want to select the best lecturers for everybody, but then use only your assistant professors and associate professors for seminars, for tutorials and lab work to contextualize the learning of your best professors, delivered by your best professors. And I think that with remote learning, we can emphasize multidisciplinary learning. And I think that we are too stuck with age cohortism. What do I mean by age cohortism? If you look at the way that we progress, year 1, year 2, year 3, postgrad, and so on, it's almost by age cohort. Everybody who's age 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. But with remote learning, there's no need to follow the age cohort anymore. Different age cohorts can mix together regardless of what stage of life they are. You might be working and you might still be studying in the evening using the same remote material. And with remote learning, I think that it's possible to lower fees generally, especially for financially distressed, so that we can equalize opportunity and access to the poor and to the disadvantaged. And this remote learning also gives us opportunity to develop closer dialogue between universities and the government. So my message to you is be different. Use this opportunity not to follow the herd, but to try to be different in your own way. So I want to end my presentation by going back to this, But actually, it is a done deal because most of you already voted about 95, 93% yes already. So I was just trying to see whether there's any improvement in the rating following my lecture. So we do see an improvement. Okay, I think we can close the poll. So about 97% of you now feel that you might agree with the hypothesis that there is a causal link between individual resilience and institutional resilience. So that's a 4% increase. And I think that we do need to test this out, but it makes sense, doesn't it? It makes sense. So thank you very much for listening to me. I enjoyed giving this lecture.